Declan Edwards, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Mate, tell me about what you do. I was just saying to you, you've just got an interesting career, an interesting job. Tell me about it. I've never heard of someone else with your business.
Yeah. So I suppose my official title these days is happiness researcher, coach, and consultant. What that means is I've spent really the last 10 years now studying a field called positive psychology. Sometimes they call it the science of happiness. Basically just getting really obsessed with what does it mean to live a happy life. And that then led me to open a social enterprise called BU Happiness College, which is a college dedicated to helping people learn those skills that are associated with happiness. Previously, they were called soft skills. We call them human skills.
Sure. Yep.
You know, things like how to manage your mind and emotions effectively. Things like how to actually understand yourself and have a clear sense of self and build your self-worth and self-esteem. We know these skills not only are correlated with living a happier life, but are increasingly in demand in workplaces. So there's a real gap there where organizations are saying, we want people with these soft skills. People aren't learning them at home or at school. So decided when I was much younger and naive and kind of went, how hard could it be to build a business in an emerging industry? Decided I'd give it a go and open a happiness college. And here we are, 7.5, 8 years later now.
Far out. Well, like, it's so funny you say that because someone could become, let's just call it a plastic surgeon. If you don't have those skills, you could run out of business. Like people could be like, I'm not working with this guy. So it's more important than people realize. You don't learn that at uni, for example. I guess that's that's probably what's motivated you so much, realizing, hey, like this is a piece of the puzzle. If you don't have this, it's over.
Yeah, and it's a crucial piece of the puzzle. Like not only on the interpersonal level, but if we look at business, right, and small businesses, so much of running a business is those human skills. And so you're right, you can be incredibly good at your technical skills or your job-related skills, but without those humanistic skills, those elements of managing your mind and emotions while making good decisions, inevitably your business is probably going to go out of business eventually. And you know, some amazing research has been done by pioneers in the field of positive psychology who came before me, people like Sean Aker at Harvard and his team. And they found this thing called the happiness advantage, which in businesses, so in businesses and workplaces, they actually found that happier organizations, happier leaders, happier staff was a strategic and competitive advantage. Now I'm talking things like 20% higher performance, 37% higher sales, higher profitability, like all these things that businesses traditionally look at as this is the measure of success are more likely if their team, and particularly their founder as well, are happy.
Wow. Wow. And I imagine too, it's happiness from the collective. So if your wife and kids aren't happy with how you're working, there's a flow-on effect. You're not going to do it forever as well. So longevity.
Yeah, without a doubt. And when we look at happiness, I want to be really clear here because I think a lot of the time, particularly in like Western countries, very individualistic cultures, we think of happiness as this fleeting feeling.
Yeah, what is happiness?
Right? We think of it more as joy, this thing that like...
Or excitement or novelty.
Or accomplishment. It's like there's this idea of I'll be happy when, which in the research we call the hedonic treadmill or the happiness trap. So we hinge our happiness on this, some goal that we're going to achieve. And you could put anything after that. I'll be happy when my business is doing more revenue. I'll be happy when I get more holidays. I'll be happy when I spend more time with the family. I'll be happy when I get a break from the family because the kids are driving me up the wall, right? There's always this next goal. And so often when I talk to people about happiness, they think of it only in this lens of this fleeting feeling and this end state. But when we look at happiness in the research, we think of it more of as like almost like an emotional umbrella term. So there's all these other states that sit underneath that emotional umbrella term of happiness. You've got contentment, purpose, connection, contribution, like all these different things that matter that we know lead to a really meaningful and fulfilling and happy life that we often forget about in Western society.
So there's a lot of ingredients to get you to a state of happiness where you're not happy one day and you're miserable the next day. You're in a state where you can say, hey, I'm happy with my outlook on the world, with what I value, with what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis and where it's leading. Is that sort of the picture?
Correct, yeah. And even working on happiness and learning about happiness for so long. Now, a lot of people ask me now, like if I was to boil everything I've researched and learned into one sentence, what is it? It's that happiness is a skill. Like fundamentally, it is these skill sets that when they come together, we tend to rate our lives as happier. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to feel over the moon and sunshine and rainbows every day. It also doesn't mean that the other emotions are not valid or valuable. right? There's a big move of toxic positivity at the moment of like always be happy, only think good vibes, think good thoughts, right?
Yeah.
That's really actually unhealthy. We shame and judge and guilt ourselves and each other around experiencing very human emotions.
Well, you're crazy if you're at a funeral and you're sitting there laughing and smiling the whole time.
Exactly, yeah. I'd be genuinely concerned if someone came to me and they're like, I'm happy all of the time.
Yeah.
That's not the goal. The goal is, have we developed the skills to be able to manage our mind and our emotions more effectively rather than wrestling with them? Have we developed the skills to feel genuinely connected to ourselves? So knowing our values, knowing our definition of happiness and success, knowing our strengths and what we uniquely bring to the table. And have we developed the skills that allow us to make a positive impact on others? If we can do those well, I guarantee, I promise, you'll look back on life and you'll be like, I've lived a pretty good life.
I've done good. Wow. Have you noticed the correlation between business owners and employees? Do one tend to be more happy because they've got more freedom and more control over their lives? Or is it the other way around where security and being a part of a community? Because a lot of business owners are out on their own a lot of the time. They're traveling or they're in a room with the door closed and on a laptop. Have you noticed anything, whether it's anecdotal or through research, of like who's happier, quote unquote?
Yeah, I feel like you were flashing back to my early days of starting BU, saying sitting alone in a room with your laptop
Totally.
and just chipping away at this dream and this vision. I was like, yeah, I get that. I did that for a lot of years. I think, so it's interesting because when you look at the research, mental health challenges, anxiety, depression, they're actually higher in business owners than in the general population. And I think there's a lot of factors that play into that. But what I notice a lot, particularly in the business community, is our greatest strength is we can come up with a vision and an idea. Our greatest weakness is that vision and idea often becomes an expectation that we place on ourselves, on our business, and on life. And so we start holding ourselves to this. We have an idea in our head of this is what my business should look like. This is what I should be able to do as a leader. This is what's going to happen with my customers. This is what's going to happen with revenue. We set all these ideas. And then whenever they don't get matched by reality, we experience judgment, shame, guilt, frustration, disappointment.
Yeah, it's interesting. My brain's exploding on this a little bit because, when your expectations aren't met, that does make you feel unhappy, number one. But entrepreneurs or business owners, whatever, typically tend to be the type of people that will shoot for the stars, and they're very rigid about it as well. I'm going to make this, or I'm going to build this. This is how it's going to go. So it's a bit of a setup in a way to be miserable if anything falls out of place in that sense.
100%. And it's funny because you mentioned business owners set these expectations. When they're not met, we're upset. But who set the expectations in the first place? Like, we're doing it to ourselves. And by the way, I say we because I do this as well. Studying positive psychology and being seen as quote unquote an expert in happiness doesn't stop me from being human. I often say to people like, I'm a human being first, I'm a happiness expert second. And so I still experience all these same things. And particularly with that expectation piece, the other challenge I see a lot in business owners is we move the bar for the expectation. We go, I'll be happy when I have 50 clients. You get to 50 clients and you celebrate for what? All of 3 minutes.
Oh, mate, yeah.
And then the goal is now, I'll be happy when, or the business will be successful when I'm at 75 clients. Yep. So we're always chasing.
Yep.
I think one of our greatest strengths as entrepreneurs and business owners and people in that space is we look for what we can do better. We set the vision for where we can move, but we forget to celebrate how far we've already damn come.
Yeah.
And we forget to celebrate where we're already at.
And you're right. The problem is that is the strength. So you're rewarded for that. People go, oh, I love that you took this risk and it seems to be working out.
Yep.
But it was that I wasn't happy. Like, I wouldn't say happy, but I wasn't content. And that's what made me push forward. So you're getting rewarded for that kind of lifestyle.
Yep.
And that can be the very thing stopping you from actually being content, actually being happy.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, I think a very useful perspective to take and a challenge for people to do is to recognize in themselves sometimes their greatest strengths, if left unchecked, can become their greatest drawbacks to happiness.
Gotcha. Okay.
And one of my favorite ones is people who are really celebrated as being problem solvers. I'm really good at solving problems. Well, if that's where you get a lot of your sense of self-worth and a lot of your validation, guess what you're always going to need to have on your plate? You're going to need a problem to
You're
solve.
you're gonna need some drama.
All right. So guess
Yeah.
who's not going to feel good when life's going smoothly?
Yeah.
And so
Wow.
we need to be able to balance this out and go, hey, this is a unique strength that I have as a business owner. But I need to be able to balance it out and complement it by also developing, its antidote, its other side. Sometimes I use the analogy of we all have living inside of our brains a little CEO version of us that thinks of the future, sets the goals, sets the vision, holds us to account, very action oriented.
Thinks we know what we're doing.
Thinks we know what we're doing,
Yeah.
right? Is the real go-getter, the high achiever. And then on the other side of the table in our brain is a little monk version of us. And the monk's like, let's just be here now. Let's be present. Let's be happy. Let's be connected. Let's be content. Now, both of those parts of ourselves have strengths and drawbacks. I'm not saying the solution to a meaningful, fulfilling life is shave your head, don monk robes, and go meditate in the forest forever. I think there's benefit to achievement and accomplishment and challenge and growth, and all that comes from the CEO side. But if we just go on the CEO side and we overlook that monk side of being present, being calm, being content, thinking of contribution and connection, we miss a big part of life. And so my challenge for myself, and I see a lot in other business owners, is how do we get those two parts of ourselves working on the same team rather than playing tug of war with our brain?
Absolutely. When you say smell the roses, stop and smell the roses, what does that look like? Because I sit here and go, I think I've learnt to appreciate the journey of progress equaling happiness, like the Tony Robbins quote, and I've come to terms with that. But when I think of stopping and smelling the roses, I actually don't know how to do that. Like I don't know what to do or what that looks like, whether that's go on a holiday and like slow down and go, okay, this is at the detriment of progress right now. That's fine because I'm enjoying and happy days. I'm going to the Gold Coast tomorrow, so that's why I'm saying that because it's front of mind. And I said this year I was going to like not go on a holiday. No, I didn't say that. I actually said anyway. I was like trying to be as smart as I can financially and not blow money. And I've hit a point and I'm like, nah, Anna, we're going somewhere, we're having some fun. But I kind of go, well, what do I actually do to kind of be grateful and like stop and look back and go, oh, I wanted to be at this point, even if it's a small progress. I wanted to be here and we're here. You got any thoughts or tips around that?
Yeah, I've got a lot of thoughts. I think so. To answer the first question of how do I actually stop and smell the roses, step one, you need to find where there's some damn roses.
Yes.
You can't smell something that you can't see. You can't experience something that you're not aware of.
Yep.
And I say that somewhat jokingly, but also very seriously in the sense that the human mind is pretty hardwired to look for what's wrong and what needs fixing rather than what's right and can be celebrated. It's called the negative cognitive bias, which is just positive psychology's way of saying your brain's pretty good at being a negative thinker first because that's advantageous to our survival.
Don't keep you safe.
Right? Yeah. It's funny. The other thing I'd say, happiness as a skill is the big thing I'd put on a billboard. On the other side of the billboard, I'd say your brain doesn't give a fuck if you're happy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Your brain's priority isn't happiness.
Yeah.
It's survival.
Yes.
And so we need to work with our brain and train it and rewire it and work on it, much like we train our bodies and work out and exercise and eat well. We take care of it. Kind of have to do the same with your mind. What you're touching on with smelling the roses is one of the best practices for strengthening our mind and working with our mind. Now, in the research, they call it a gratitude practice. Some people feel a bit weird about the word gratitude, feels a little bit unattainable. So you can call it appreciation. You can call it smelling the roses. You can call it finding the good in life. I don't care what you call it. The practice is the same, which is consciously noticing when things go well and taking a moment to savor it.
I like that, being conscious of it.
Yeah, actually sit in it. So a saying I often use for myself that I'll share is I need to remind myself often to marinate in the good moments of life and navigate the challenges. Often I and many other people do the opposite. We marinate in the challenges of life. We sit in the struggle.
Yeah.
We soak it up. We simmer in it. And then when it comes to good moments, we navigate straight through them. We just sail through and go, that was nice.
Totally.
Right? And so we need to flip that. We need to go, hey, here's a good moment. Let's actually be present with it. Let's marinate in this. Let's take it in. And then here's a challenging moment. Let's work through it. Now, what does it mean to marinate in it? My personal favorite, gratitude practice. Whether you do that written journal, whether you do it in conversation. I use an app called Otter, like the animal. It's free. You can talk into it. It's like a vocal journal. I find for me, sometimes my mind moves quite quickly and my hand doesn't keep up if I try to write it, whereas I can talk through my thoughts and feelings quite well. And the prompts I use for myself for that, I found over the years that if someone were to say, sit down and tell me 3 good things that happened today, there are definitely days where my brain goes, nothing good happened today. Today was shit. Right? And that may or may not be true to a degree, but it's my job to challenge that brain. And so instead of looking at a blank canvas and going, put 3 things on the blank canvas that went well today or were good today, I try to give myself some prompts to get the brain thinking. So my personal 3 that I use are, what's a small moment that happened today that went well, but you'd normally take it for granted? And straight away, as soon as I use that prompt, my mind just went, I found a new sushi place on the way here that I hadn't been to before that I genuinely really enjoyed. I had a really nice meal. I kind of sat, put my phone away, was really present with it. And I would normally just take that for granted. Without that prompt, I'd just skate through the day. My second one is then, who is someone I'm grateful for today and why? And again, as soon as I use that prompt, someone comes to mind. I just think, Adele, who was someone who invited me to speak at a conference they were hosting earlier this morning. Why am I grateful for that? She gave me the chance to spread this message of happiness and some of my research with a wider audience. And I'm really grateful that she shared her story. You know, she's a graduate of BU Happiness College, and that's why she invited me along. And she was sharing quite vulnerably her experience of working on her happiness. And then the last one, sometimes the hardest, but also the most beneficial. What's something about myself I'm grateful for today and why? And sometimes that'll be deep and meaningful. I'm grateful for my sense of commitment and grit. I'm grateful for the ability I've honed over the years to share messages that resonate with people. And to be honest, sometimes it'll be very superficial. I'm really grateful that, I've got a pretty full beard. It's not too patchy. I'm pretty, you know what I mean? Like I'm grateful that I can make people laugh. Like like, it doesn't matter so much, but it's just practicing finding the good in myself. And so for me, and for everyone listening to this who's struggled with gratitude practice before, one of the best bits of advice I can give for smelling the roses, give yourself prompts. Feel free to pinch mine. They're not trademarked. Like, use them, right? Or come up with your own. And then take that little moment to actually marinate in them. So be present with them. Explore why, out of everything I could have chosen for those examples, why did those ones come to mind? That's where we're going to get the benefit.
It's interesting. You touched on almost taking a bit of pride in yourself throughout this process, because I was going to ask you about that, but you answered it perfectly. What's interesting is yesterday I'm in a lot of group chats, and I was in one with my brothers, and we were talking about how you can be unhappy even in scenarios where things are going really well. And it's confusing. You're like, why do I feel like crap? We were listening to another podcast where this guy, I won't even remember any of the names, but he was talking about how the Greek word for psyche or soul is psyche. So when you say your psyche, it's actually talking about your soul. And sometimes your soul will like wave the flag and say, hey, we're not on track here. And what's funny is the most depressed, unhappy, and I had like insomnia at one point is I was on a 6-week holiday in America and I flew business class there, and I was doing everything that I wanted to do. I was in New York, I was in Yosemite, I was in LA, I was in Boston, I was in Texas as well. And I remember going, why do I feel like crap? Like mentally, I felt really, really low. And I'm like, I'm spending so much bloody money right now. I better enjoy this.
This was meant to bring me heaps of happiness.
I better be enjoying this. I remember, being angry at myself for not having more fun.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sleeping, a bit of jet lag and jumping all over the place, but I'm like, man, I'm not even sleeping. Can't even enjoy this trip. And when I think back to it, so I was probably 25 at the time, 30 now. So I was in my prime physically, had all the energy in the world. I had no purpose. I wasn't responsible for anyone but myself. I was eating meals every day. I wasn't contributing anything to anyone else but myself. So I was just deciding where to eat next, what thing to go and look at. I wasn't physically challenging myself, which a 25-year-old guy, it's a pretty natural thing to want to be active and be fit. I wasn't doing any of those things. And I'm like, that's funny. I could see why my soul would be going, hey, this isn't it.
Yep.
You're not meant to be acting like a retiree right now. You're 25. And I just find that interesting. So when I make decisions now, I realize, hang on, maybe you don't want to sit on a beach drinking beer all day. Maybe that isn't actually what you want. Maybe purpose and responsibility is going to keep your brain ticking, happy, and your soul feeling more fulfilled. I just find that interesting.
I think what you've touched on there is really quite profound too, that our definition of what a happy, meaningful, fulfilling life is will evolve with us. in different stages of life too. Like it's not you'll find your definition of happiness and then that's what you commit to for the rest of your life. It will evolve inherently. The other thing you touched on really beautifully there, and I'm with you that whether it's the soul waving the red flag, I tend to use the example of life tends to give you warnings when it's time to make change.
Wow.
First, you get the pokes. There'll be something internal in you that's just like, something just doesn't quite sit right here. I don't think I'm on the right path. And most of us, myself included, ignore the pokes. Because life is busy and because we're already committed to this. And because
intellectually you've talked yourself out of it.
Exactly, right? So we're like, no, let's just ignore that little warning sign.
Yeah.
Then you ignore it long enough and life starts giving you pushes. And that's where we start to see, mental health challenges come in. That's where we start to see maybe some things externally start breaking down, relationships, maybe things start happening with your physical health. There's these bigger warning signs that like, hey, something has to change here. If you ignore enough pushes, eventually life throws a punch. Now, for anyone who's been punched by life, and I've had a couple of my own fair share, life throws a mean right hook. Like life will flatten you if it punches you. And this is where we have major breakdowns of things. My hope for people, and a lot of what we spend our time doing with happiness coaching at the college, is helping people learn how to stay connected to and attuned to the pokes and be aware of the pushes so that they can preempt and ideally avoid the punches. Don't wait till things hit rock bottom to address your happiness. And to be honest, this is not just a reflection of, I think, a personal struggle. Historically, the entire mental health system was built around this idea of how do we help people go from -10 to neutral? And that's as good as it's going to get, which, don't get me wrong, valid, important, we need that work. But if the best we're ever hoping to get people to is getting through life, like I think there's a lot more to life than that.
Yeah,
that's where positive psychology comes as a field. It's how do we go from neutral to +10? And I hope there's more and more people now seeing, I mean, even when we use the term mental health, if I say mental health, what people automatically tend to think of is actually mental ill health.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So I want us to expand our vocabulary on this and go, hey, addressing mental ill health and mental challenges, very important. So grateful that we have amazing charities and psychiatry and psychology and all these amazing approaches that can do that. But we need to expand our sense of mental well-being to go, this is also about flourishing. This is about thriving. This is about feeling our best so that we can spread a positive ripple effect to others. It's not just about us. It's not a selfish pursuit. It's I'm looking to be my best and feel my best so I can best be of service to others.
Could you give us an example of what, say, a poke might feel like, a push might feel like, and then what a punch might be? Because are you talking internally how you feel? When you say a punch, are you talking something in like externally in your life turns to hell? Like
definitely,
could
can
you
be
talk
both.
to that?
So I'll give some examples of some bad punches I've seen. I'm talking the people who sacrificed 20 years of their life pursuing success at the great cost of happiness. And they get to the big dream of their career and financial success and they look around and go, my marriage is in shambles. I barely see my kids. I'm incredibly unhealthy physically. I'm not sleeping well. These are punches, right? These are massive warning signs from life that something is not sustainable here, that something is broken.
You're not going to get that time back, especially with your kids. As
Exactly.
They're growing up. Yeah.
Right?
It's sad, yeah.
And so those are like the extreme end state bad examples, right? Of external change. The pokes are so much harder to notice, right? It is that real little, I don't even know how to describe it other than there's a beautiful quote, something along the lines of, our soul whispers where fear yells, right? So there's part of us that inside of us is just kind of like whispering and nudging of like, this is the path you're meant to be on. These are decisions you're meant to make. And then there's a much louder part of our brain, again, because of evolutionary advantage, to look for what's dangerous, look for the threat, look for what keeps us alive, that yells. Like the voice of fear and stress and overwhelm and burnout is very loud.
Wow.
And the voice of faith and trust and self-confidence and intuition, whatever you want to call it, universe, God, spirit, soul, I don't care what label you put on it, that whispers. And it is an ongoing pursuit of us to be able to hear past the noise of fear and overwhelm and worry and stress and reconnect with that whisper of intuition.
That is really interesting because when you were describing that at the start, I almost jumped in and said, how can you differentiate that poke from anxiety taking the wheel and you're just following your fears because you're going, oh, I don't feel right about this. Maybe you're terrified of public speaking and that's why you don't feel right about it. Doesn't mean it's the wrong thing to do, but you nailed it. Like fear is loud and it's crippling and it's screaming at you. But when you're meant to do something that's amazing, it is. It's that like subtle, nah, this is going to be a good thing. Nah, no, I've got a sense of either anticipation or excitement that goes beyond what I naturally can I can see could happen here.
Yeah.
Like I look like an idiot on stage. I'm just using that example. And it's funny, I grew up religious. I'm still a Christian. And in the Bible, there's this story where I'm going to butcher this, but I think it's Isaiah says to God to give him a sign. And there's this like big hurricane and then there's fires and big storms. And then he hears a little whisper and it says God wasn't in the hurricane, he wasn't in the fire, he wasn't in the flood, whatever happened, God was in the whisper, which is very similar to what you just said.
And what's interesting is we see those sort of stories and ideas repeated across history in many different religions, beliefs, cultural practices, different societies. And this is the thing, like the field of positive psychology, the science of happiness, understanding the evidence-based practice of how do we become happier, that's relatively new. But a lot of the principles from it, you can trace back to the ancient Greeks. You can see in the Bible, you can see in the Quran, you can see in Hinduism, you can see in Buddhism. Like, I don't know, for me personally, if that many belief systems, cultures, practices, you know what I mean, across human history are coming to pretty similar conclusions, we should probably listen to them.
Totally. Well, even, I should have said this to Kate Holm, who was just in, but nutrition, they're looking back at what people were doing thousands of years ago and going, actually, that's right. And then what we're doing today is wrong. And it's like, isn't that funny? We're going backwards in some ways. And it sounds like we're going backwards in happiness as well in a lot of ways.
Yeah, which look, it's just coming back to the basics, right? It's happiness does not need to be this incredibly convoluted, complex, esoteric thing that only the lucky few on society get to experience. Genuinely believe a happy and meaningful and fulfilling life is the purpose of life for everyone. Now, what are the things that we need for that? For me, I think in terms of 3 connections. 1, we need to have a really good connection to ourselves. That means understanding what we said before, our mind, our emotions, our strengths, understanding who we are, knowing our values. So we need to connect really well to us. That's where we'll hear that whisper as well. Second one, we need to connect really well to others. Happiness is not an internal job. It's not a solo pursuit. It frustrates me. I'll be really open here with you, actually. I haven't spoken about this before, like on a podcast, but it does genuinely frustrate me that we have a multi-billion-dollar self-help industry and next to no community help industry. So much of our approach to personal development is individualized.
Therapy by yourself.
Right? This is for you to solve on your own. It's
Yep.
like, no, we need a collective approach to this. We need a communal approach.
Narrative Bint says people heal in communities.
Yes, without a doubt. And that connection to others, we know is not only advantageous to our own happiness and healing and growth and well-being, it does spread a ripple effect. There's been some research done in the positive psychology space that suggests happiness is felt up to 3 degrees of separation. I want to highlight what that means. That means like if you become happier, your wife's friend's sister is measurably happier because you became happier.
Jeez.
Right? And so like when we talk about, for me, I've committed my career, my business, everything we do, everything I do professionally is dedicated to this vision of growing global happiness. Now, how in the world am I going to change the happiness of the planet when it's me and a small team based out of Australia? It's through that ripple effect by connecting to others. And then our third one, so we have connection to self, connection to others. Third is connection to something greater than yourself, whether that be a purpose, an idea, a charity, a religion or spiritual belief and practice, connection to nature, something that's just bigger than us, legacy in some way. If you can do those 3 connections well, there's a happy life.
Wow.
Now, of course, it's easier said than done, but we don't need to overcomplicate it.
We probably make it hard too. Like I was just about to ask you, like perfectly leading into this question, someone's listening to this, they know their life isn't set up for happiness for them, for their family. They've followed the trodden path. They've done what their parents wanted them to do, whatever it is. And they're sitting there genuinely going, whether they run a business, whether they're an employee, whether they're working 2 days a week, 5 days a week, whatever, financially going well, not well, like I said, I was in America spending money, wasn't happy. So whatever scenario they're in, they're sitting here going, I need to shake this up massively, but I'm terrified about this. I'm terrified about that. I'm interested what advice you'd give to those people, because I just want to throw this in there. I feel like we think we can't change as much as we actually can. We tell ourselves these stories.
Yeah.
No, I need that 2-story house. So that's why I need to keep doing this. I'll throw it over to you. But what would you just say to someone in that scenario?
Yeah. So I think you hit something really poignant there, which is recognizing that we have the ability to change is one of the most crucial factors of being able to change and make positive changes, right? If we tie ourselves to anything, right? If we tie ourselves to a sense of self, if we tie ourselves to this goal that we set, I was the same. Like I, went through a lot of particularly my formative teenage years, really wrestling with a sense of who I was, really struggling with a sense of self-worth, self-esteem, like really not having a good relationship with me. And I learned over those years that I got validation through achievement. And well, if I achieve big things, then people will approve of me. And if people approve of me, then I'll like myself and then I'll be happy. And so for me, I kept upping the ante. And I was like, okay, well, I'll do really well in school. Okay, I grew up playing basketball. I'll try to keep climbing up that ladder and playing more and more at higher levels. And then I went, what's the biggest thing that I could do that would just earn me adoration and validation? And at the time, I was starting to get into mountaineering, and I was like, I'm going to climb Everest. The goals of a 19-year-old who's insecure. I was like, if I summit the highest mountain in the world, then I will be worth something. Then I'll be happy. And I remember contacting an organization that organizes climbs of Mount Everest, and they said, this is what we need to see from you. We need to see X amount of climbs on these mountains. And I went, right, that's the next 10, 20 years of my life. That's what I'm going to pursue. And that led me to, I went to Everest Base Camp, climbed that, did a bunch of climbing in various other places, and then went to Africa to climb Kilimanjaro. I went, this is going to be the peak. This is the highest mountain in Africa. That's when I'll be happy and worth something. Meanwhile, I'm actually running the Happiness College by this stage. I've studied positive psychology. I'm still falling into the same trap. It's only with hindsight that I see it. I remember I touched, so we were going up on summit night, and I got really bad altitude sickness. My wife is with me at this time too. And I'm on all fours, crying, and everything in my mind was just saying, like, just lie down and sleep. I remember saying to the guide, I was like, I'm going to sleep now. He goes, if you stay here and sleep, you're going to die. I was like, I don't care anymore. Like, I was so ambivalent to my own life, which is a weird thing. So I wasn't fundamentally unhappy that I knew of. And we got to the top bit, it's called Gilman's Point, and then you go further around for the full summit. And instead of going for the full summit, the guy was like, you need to get down. Like, you're very unwell. You're very sick. So we went down, crawl into the tent, and I look at my phone, and it's just ticked over to my 25th birthday. Similar to what you're saying in America. I'm like, here I am ticking all the boxes that I told myself 6 years ago would make me happy and fulfilled. And I feel so disconnected from myself. I feel so disconnected from my wife. She's somewhere on the mountain. I don't know where she is at the moment. I got sent down. I feel so disconnected from my sense of purpose and meaning. I'm starting this small business, but I'm just so stressed about it all the time. I think out of all the moments in building my business that I look back on, that moment and the months that followed when I got home, about making some really serious changes to the business structure, some really serious changes to the goals that I had for the business, some really serious changes in myself, took the most courage. Letting go of what we thought success and happiness was is one of the most courageous things that we can do. And thankfully, what came off the back of that is a much more authentic and genuine and healthy and secure definition of success and happiness for myself and my business. So I hear you. Like, I think it is so hard when you've invested so much time and money and resources and effort and stress into a goal to go, wait, this isn't it anymore. And so if people are listening and they're like, I think I might be on that path. I think I might be going down a path where I'm pursuing something that's not even the right fit for me anymore. A, the first step is to see it. Can't change something we can't see. B, I would strongly recommend coming back to those 3 connections as starting points. What are things I do that help me feel genuinely connected to myself? Have you been doing them lately? Chances are probably not. What are things I do that help me feel genuinely connected to others? Have I been doing them lately? And what are things I can do that help me feel genuinely connected to something bigger than me? If you come back to that as a starting point, what you'll find is there'll be common elements that you can start shaping, I call it a happiness blueprint. We all have one. 8 billion people on the planet have their own happiness blueprint, their definition for what a happy, successful, meaningful, purposeful life is. And no one's got the exact same blueprint. And it's kind of up to you to unpack it to find it. But it does start with quite a courageous leap to go, I think I'm pursuing someone else's blueprint right now.
Yeah, I love it. Let's talk about the ego. I can hear that.
My man.
Let's
talk about my ego.
Yeah.
I can hear wrestle.
Well, I can hear it throughout what you're saying is the ego is jumping up and down saying, I want to do this. I want to achieve that. And I've heard people, and I'm coming from this, I really don't understand what people mean when they say the ego in its full sense. I know it's like your sense of self, but I kind of hear it here and there on podcasts and conversations. But I'm interested in your take because the only experience I've probably had with breaking away from my ego was I use public speaking as an example. That was always a huge fear of mine. I know it is for most people statistically. I remember one day I had to give a speech at my brother's birthday party and I could feel it starting to creep up, that fear. And I said to myself, this is probably like not the best way to do it, guys. But I said to myself, I don't give a shit what anyone in this room thinks of me. That's what I said. I said, I don't give a shit what anyone thinks of me. I looked around the room and I just told myself, who cares? Screw it. Got up, said what I wanted to say, gave the mic back, walked off, didn't think about it again. It was like a turning point in my life. I'd do that whenever I'm scared. I don't give a shit. And the better version of that, I've said that to someone before and they said, yeah, my version of that is I think, I'm worthy if like whatever happens. And there's more positive versions. Yeah. But for me, it's like sharp enough. Yeah. It like snaps me out. And I say, I don't give a shit. And I do that like, I don't know, once every few months when I'm doing something scary. I feel like that's almost like a bit of an ego separation of like, I can step outside myself and go, I'm just another person. There's not many people in this room that are good speakers anyway. When I'm watching someone speak, I'm not judging them. I don't care if they're good or not. They're like another person like me. It's like a very small example that I can give you of me breaking away. Is breaking away from your ego a key to happiness, or is it the opposite? Should you dive into your ego and embrace, that sense of self and identity? I don't know. I'm just interested in what you think.
Yeah. So I think with anything psychologically or emotionally, trying to fight it is normally long-term a losing battle because we wrestle with our brain and with our emotions and normally come off second best in that wrestle, right? It might work short term, but eventually it's not going to work. So I'm always more interested rather than like, okay, how do we break away from this or fight it or overcome it or beat it? The amount of people who say to me like, how do I beat anxiety? And I'm like, you don't, right? Anxiety beats you if you try to fight it, right? It's more, how do I appreciate what this is trying to do for me? Our brain no one's brain intentionally gets up in the morning. And this is going to be a big corner, but I don't think anyone, even with biological challenges of mental health struggles with like chronic depression or chronic anxiety, I think it's very rare that our brain goes, I'm going to ruin your day today. Right? We're trying to do something good. There's some form of positive intent there. Anxiety might be trying to keep us safe. It's trying to protect us from risk of judgment or failure or whatever it may be.
Getting broken away from the tribe because you're rejected. Like
exactly. Yeah. And so if we can recognize what's happening with our thoughts and feelings and go, what's the positive intent behind this? Okay, I can recognize that. Thank you. I appreciate it. And then we hear other parts of ourselves. So it's the same with our ego. What is the ego trying to tell me? The ego is inherently normally based in self-protection, right? So it's insecure, it's fearful, it's survivorship, it's defensive, right? It's thinks if I achieve enough, then I'll be safe. If I have enough resources, I cannot possibly die, right? It's like...
competitive. It's very competitive.
Right, so it's very survival-based. And so if we can recognize that and go, hey, thanks. Thanks for coming to the table, ego. Thanks for letting me know that. I appreciate it. Hey, I want to hear from this other part of me at the moment. And if we can get them, again, similar to what we were saying before with the CEO versus the monk, right? It's like similar to what we were saying before with the fear versus intuition. Like it's the same conversation, just different titles we give it. How do we get the different parts of our mind, different parts of our feelings to be on the same team, to work with each other rather than fight each other? And I think the first step is self-awareness. Second step is self-compassion. Being able to be like, hey, I'm a human being and I'm going through my first attempt at this crazy thing called life, which means I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to drop the ball. I'm going to stuff up. I'm going to have fears. I'm going to have insecurities. I'm going to have great moments. I'm going to have down moments. That is part of having a human experience. That's okay. And again, I'm so aware, I want to highlight all this stuff is so much easier said than done. This is an ongoing practice of unpacking and working
That's
on
good
it.
though. It's
And
good.
honing the soil, right? It's like any other skill. Same with looking after our physical well-being and body. The fundamentals of looking after our physical well-being, on paper, aren't that hard. Move your body in ways that you enjoy. Sleep and rest. Eat well. Stay hydrated. But so many of us struggle with that, right? And again, I don't think that's a personal failing or anything. It's just going, hey, there's often a gap between this makes sense, I get it, and then the ongoing practice. It's an ongoing practice for me to stay in those 3 connections we've spoken about. It's an ongoing practice for me to get different parts of myself to work together rather than fighting them. It's an ongoing practice for me to hone the skills of happiness.
I really like how you think, because it's not dismissive of any parts of you. It's very embracive. Yeah, I've got the ego, I've got my brain, I've got my soul, I've got all these things speaking to me, and you're not saying the ego's bad and
Just doing its job.
That's amazing. I haven't heard anyone say that.
Yeah.
To be honest, like just not dismissive of any part of who you are and give it a seat at the table. But it's just a seat. It's not, you know what I mean? It's not on the megaphone all the time.
Exactly. It's not the one making the choices all the time.
That's good. No, I like that. Interestingly enough, how do you market your business? Because you talked about growing this thing.
Yeah.
Imagine a lot of speaking, networking. And look, let's even put the term marketing to the side. Like, how have you grown this business? Because you, what are you selling? You're selling something that is so important to every single human being, really. And yeah, what is your? Let's just back up a little bit. What are the services that you offer within this business? Because this is huge. Like, this is a beast.
You're telling me. Yeah. So look, to start with that question, how did we divvy up? Because you're right, this core concept and vision of growing global happiness, that is a massive endeavor and undertaking.
Yeah.
Like, where do you even start with that?
That's why I paused back there and thinking, hang on a minute, this could go anywhere.
Where do we get there? Right. And so where I started, it's the classic story of, can you summarize your business plan on a napkin or on a 1-page piece of paper? But that's genuinely where we kind of started out.
Right.
And so part of that was, well, what do we need to influence to make the world happier? And I do 3 lines. Step 1, help individuals be happier. And that's where we started. So way back in 2017, when we got going, I went, well, how do we help individuals be happier? Well, they need to learn the skills and resources to become happier, the skills of happiness. So we're an education company. So that's hence BU Happiness College, right? So we need to have an education part. And then they need to practice their knowledge. They need to hone, that skill set and work on it, which means they're probably going to need accountability and guidance. And so I used to joke that we're like having a personal trainer for your brain, right? So between those two, we went, well, there's our first offering. That's what we'll go to market with. Personal training for your brain, personal happiness coaching. You have an online college that you get to log into and access. You learn those skills. You then meet with your own personal coach. They keep you accountable. You dive deeper. You strengthen those skills over time.
Perfect example, by the way, because when you first go to the gym, you have no idea what you're doing.
Yep.
Someone shows you and you do it enough time, like you said, they keep you accountable and they're like, mate, I know you feel tired right now, push through.
Yep.
Then you can actually carry it yourself. But if you don't
Exactly.
have that moment, you're just in there doing random stuff.
Exactly. And a measure of our success is not just how many people do we have actively enrolled at the college. It's how well do our graduates maintain these skills. So we check in with our graduates years after they've finished at the college, years after they're done with their own personal happiness coach. Hey, are you still working on these skills? Are you still able to benefit from what you learned in your time here? And we've got a really high success rate for that. And so that was our go-to-market strategy. And thankfully, the reason the personal training and gym came to mind for me at the time was because that was my background before this. Whilst I was going through university, I was working in the fitness industry. And so we originally went to market by partnering with the fitness industry. I'd call gyms and PTs and say, are you guys running a 6 to 8 week challenge? And a lot of them were. I went, cool, talk to me about what's involved in the challenge. They went, oh, well, we're going to focus on their physical fitness, getting them familiar with the gym and with movement. We've got a dietitian or nutritionist coming in to talk about that. And I went, awesome. Who's talking about mental health? I went, no one. I went, interesting. So you're missing part of the puzzle here. Hey, I'm happy to come speak for free. This is my background. This is what I'm researching. This is what I'm studying. I'm happy to come speak for free. And that got us our first early adopters and clients. That got us revenue to then stay alive, right? And keep going. And so that was one. That's still to this day, the majority of our revenue is from individual enrollments coming to the college either on our self-study program, the Happiness Blueprint, where they do all the skills themselves and keep themselves accountable. I guess like getting a gym program without having the PT, or by working one-on-one with a personal happiness coach. Then arm 2, which we started in 2019, was, okay, individuals are going to help make the world happier, but it's going to take a long time to reach 8 billion individuals, right, through that path. So we went, what if we made workplaces happier? People spend an inordinate amount of their time at work.
More than with your partner and kids half the time.
Yeah, an insane amount of our life is spent at work. And so if we are fundamentally unhappy at work, it's going to be really hard to live a happy life. And so I went, okay, we need to improve how organizations measure happiness in their workplace. We need to help them understand that having happy staff is a strategic advantage, and we need to help them get there. And so we built something called the Happy Workplace Accreditation, where we help organizations measure things that contribute to happiness, like well-being, engagement, culture, leadership, resiliency. We quantify it all so that they can actually be held accountable to it. And if they meet certain thresholds, we put our reputation on theirs and say, hey, we're going to vouch for this organization and say they are a happy workplace. You are likely to be happy working here. And so then they stand out as an employer of choice. They get the best talent in their industry. And over time, we begin to shape industries through that.
It's great to think that you can say to people, hey, like, you're responsible for your employees. Like, let's do things to make them happier. Right. People always need a selfish reason, don't they? Especially when you're running a business.
And so that's why I'm so aware that I'm like, look, morally and ethically, the right thing to do if you're lucky enough to be the employer of people is to take care of their well-being. But I'm also so across the research of, and this is 20% higher productivity and 37% higher sales and better profitability. I'm like, look, morally and ethically, it's the right thing to do. It's also genuinely good for your business. Right?
It's good to say that. I just want to say it's really good you're keeping that in there, because I've been in the meeting rooms with business owners, and at the end of the day, like, they feel like their job is to make money. Yeah. And if unhappy employees meant more money, I don't know which way I'd go sometimes. So if you piece those two things together,
I'm with you. Great. Yeah, without a doubt. So that's the second arm. We launched that in 2019. That's our fastest growing arm now. The third arm we haven't started yet. The third arm's ambitious. It's where I want to end up probably in the next 10 years, which was, how do we get entire countries and nations to change the way they define their success? Currently, most countries around the world measure their success as a nation on one big metric, GDP, gross domestic product, which is how much economically are we putting out? And we're seeing right now, we're living through late stage capitalism where you can have countries producing more, you can have more profit than ever in companies, and yet people's happiness is lower. So there's been some amazing countries leading the way, like Bhutan, like a lot of the Scandinavian countries. I know the UK, Canada, and I think New Zealand have all come out and said this now. They're like, hey, in the next 5 to 10 years, we're no longer only measuring our success as a country on economic output. We're measuring it also on the well-being of our citizens, or the happiness of our citizens. And there's no reason you can't do both together. So the third arm, I would love to be in a position, it's probably what I'll do my PhD in one day, is being in a position, because it's one thing to look at what the Scandinavian countries are doing, but how relevant is that to the Australian context? How easy is that to pick up and apply to, 27 million people or whatever our population is now across quite a large land mass? Arguably pretty challenging. And so the third arm I'd love to work in is working with governments, be it local, state, national, to do policy design that genuinely makes people's lives better and holds like politicians and governments, and this might be a bit too ambitious, but holds countries accountable to not just how much money are we making as a country, but how happy and well are our citizens.
Man, I love that so much.
Just a small business, nothing.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. That's so good. Like, look, I'm sending us off path a bit here, but the whole alpha male and alpha woman thing, like in Wolves, it came out of initially, and they discovered, look, it's not like this king at the top and everyone's just making the king and queen happy. They're actually out there looking after others. I saw something, and this is on TikTok, so take it with a grain of salt, but I saw something recently that said they found the alpha male and alpha woman thing was only true in wolves in captivity, where they brought a bunch of different wolves together. Mm-hmm. What you see in nature is mum and dad and a pack. And that's actually what you're going to see naturally. When you were talking then, I was just thinking how your workplace environment, it's like not captivity.
Let's get going down here. I like this.
It's definitely not a family, but you're bringing people together from all different walks of life and, different families of origin and everything. You're shoving them into one situation, and it's kind of like, we need to like make sure these people are happy. We're responsible for them now. And then like on a national level, as a country, you got the government. What's the role of the government? Is it to look after its citizens, or is it the other way around for the country to actually look after the people at the top? Well, in democracy, we say the government's meant to look after the people.
Yep.
So if we're going to take that seriously, they should do exactly what you're saying.
Without a doubt. And the seed of that has always been there. This is not fundamentally new. I mean, I'm going to use the example of the US, right? If you go back to the US Constitution, founding document, it preserves the pursuit of happiness as an inalienable right. Everyone has the right to the pursuit of happiness. And somehow we've lost that along the way. And then I would argue, I don't know, if I was a founding father, if I could go back in time and be at that meeting, I'd say, hey, we need to not only enshrine the pursuit of happiness, but also the realization of happiness. It's not just about endlessly pursuing happiness around the next goal. It also is like, hey, how do we be happy here and now?
It's funny. I said to my parents once, talking about Centrelink and the dole and things like that, I was just asking some questions about it and how it works and how it kind of came about and why some countries have it and some countries don't. And what they said was, well, you're actually living in a safer country if people's needs are met to an extent and people are happier. It's actually good for you if other people are taken care of to an extent. If a lot of our tax money is going towards people that are disadvantaged or whatever, getting basic needs met, you're less likely to get robbed when you walk down the street. Mm-hmm. Really interesting what you're saying. If more people are happy, how much less crap happens in society in every category.
Yeah. And look, this is such an emerging field, but there's some incredible research being done. I forget their names, but there's a book called The Nordic Edge, and it's by two Australian researchers. One's an economist, and I think one was in behavioral sciences. But they looked at, there's a reason the Scandinavian countries are at the top of the happiest countries list every single year.
My sister's in Denmark right now.
Oh, there you go, right? So they were like, why is this? That's super weird. Anyway, I bought the book because they were like, we're going to study that and find out why and how we can apply it to the Australian landscape. And I'm going, hang on, our third arm is I want to work with governments. These guys are already doing some great research. Let's find out what's happening. Now, full transparency, I lean slightly left socially, slightly right economically. I'm quite centrist.
Yep.
I think a lot of, for-purpose, for-profit business owners would probably sit the same. Like, we are a social enterprise. We're here to serve a social purpose. But I like making money as much as anyone else, right?
Yeah,
so that's
absolutely.
why we lean right economically. So, for me, the first chapter of their book and research was like, higher taxes is better for the same reasons that you were saying. And I was like, no.
What?
Like, I was freaking out, like, no, this can't be true. Like, no, like, close the book, throw it away.
Yeah.
And look, there's caveats around it. Higher taxes are better in countries where there's also high trust and transparency in government.
Yes, and how it's spent.
Correct. Yeah. Right? And so, but yeah, I think there's so much to be said about what you're saying about, like, I don't know, moving away from this, like, someone else's win is my loss. Moving towards, no, how do we collectively, let's go as far as to say not even just as nations, but how do we collectively as a species? Because the challenges we're facing in the next 100 years are going to require a collective approach. Like, if we're going to work through the massive rise of artificial intelligence and automation and robotics and how that's going to disrupt entire industries, if we're going to work through climate change as a threat, if we're going to work through the increasing political divisions that we see in the world and in the media, we're going to have to do that in a way where everyone benefits. So, that's a big esoteric sort of goal and big kind of idea to pull out. But I think the example you gave from your parents of, like, this is kind of what we see in social security systems is a very valid one.
We'll end on this question. If you could have a quote that went out to everyone in the world.
Can I have two?
You can have two. Yep.
Can I have a front side and a back side of the billboard?
I think Ducko from Hit FM had 4, maybe 5. So go for it.
Cool. Yeah, look, I love this question. I use the billboard analogy. I imagine people driving to work, and if I could snap my fingers and every person on their way to work saw one side of a billboard, the message would be happiness is a skill and it's your duty to hone it. And I say duty because it's not only good for you, it's good for everyone else. All right, so please, please, please learn about the science of happiness. Learn about these skill sets that we call soft skills or human skills. Hone them. Get better at them. It'll make you a genuinely happier person. It'll make the people around you genuinely happier. It'll make the world better. So that's what they'd see on their way to work. On their way home from work, I'd do almost a complete flip. On the other side of the billboard, I'd have that quote that's like, and remember, Your brain doesn't give a fuck if you're happy, right? So yes, happiness is a skill. It's your job to hone it. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to come naturally. Your brain is going to fight and resist it at times because your brain's highest priority is your survival, not your sense of flourishing and thriving and well-being. So we're going to have to work on it. That's what my messages would be.
Declan, thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. This is really fun.